There is a room in Washington, D.C. that has witnessed the fall of empires. It is oval-shaped, no corners, no edges, as if the architects already knew that power has no boundaries. Every war America has ever fought was decided in that room. Every treaty signed, every secret buried, every lie that shaped the modern world. But in the autumn of 1995, behind its locked mahogany doors, something happened that no history book was supposed to record. Something so dangerous, so explosive, that the most powerful man on earth would spend years trying to erase it. And it all started with a smile. A smile from a 22-year-old intern named Monica Lewinsky. What followed was not just an affair. It was a collision between desire and duty, between ego and consequence, between a man who had everything and a young woman who had barely started living. A collision that would drag the President of the United States off his throne, humiliate the most powerful nation on earth on live television, and destroy the life of a young woman who never asked for any of it. This is the story the world thinks it knows, but it doesn't. This is what really happened inside the White House. January 20th, 1993, Washington, D.C. The temperature was freezing, but the crowd at the Capitol didn't feel it. They were watching history. At just 46 years old, Bill Clinton placed his hand on the Bible and became the 42nd President of the United States. He was the youngest elected president since John F. Kennedy, Harvard-educated, brilliant, charming in a way that felt almost supernatural. He could walk into any room in the world and make every single person inside it feel like they were the only one who mattered. But here is what no one ever tells you about Bill Clinton. His charm was not just a gift. It was also his greatest curse. Because the same magnetism that carried him to the most powerful office in the world, that same irresistible pull, would also become the fuse that lit the biggest political bomb in American history. On the surface, Clinton had everything a man could want: a brilliant legal mind, a wife who was arguably his intellectual equal, a daughter, a vision for America that genuinely moved millions of people. His first term saw the longest peacetime economic expansion in U.S. history. Unemployment fell. The federal deficit shrank. 35 million jobs were created. But behind the polished speeches and the saxophone performances at campaign rallies, something else was simmering. There were whispers, old rumors that had followed Clinton from Arkansas, stories of women, of indiscretions, of a man whose private life did not match the image he so carefully projected. His opponents were watching, waiting, collecting, and the pressure of the presidency was doing something to him, something he would later describe as a desperate need for escape. He just hadn't realized yet how catastrophically that search would end. Before Monica Lewinsky, before the blue dress, before the televised confession, we need to understand the battlefield Clinton was already fighting on. Because when the Lewinsky story finally exploded, it didn't land in a vacuum. It landed on top of two other fires that were already burning. The first fire had been burning since 1978. Back when Clinton was governor of Arkansas, he and Hillary partnered with two friends, James and Susan McDougal, to buy 230 acres of land in the Ozark Mountains. The plan was simple: develop vacation homes along the White River. The company they formed was called Whitewater Development Corporation. The deal collapsed. The land never sold, and the savings institution connected to the McDougals went under, costing American taxpayers over $60 million. 11 people were eventually convicted of fraud. The McDougals went to prison. And while the Clintons managed to distance themselves legally, the stench of the scandal clung to them like smoke. When Clinton entered the 1992 presidential race, his enemies unearthed Whitewater like a body they had been waiting years to find. The investigation deepened in 1993 when Deputy White House Counsel Vince Foster, a man directly connected to the Whitewater files, was found dead in a Virginia park. Official ruling: suicide. But conspiracy theories erupted across America, and the questions never fully went away. In August 1994, a special prosecutor named Kenneth Starr was assigned to investigate. Remember that name, Kenneth Starr. He will matter enormously later. The second fire arrived the same year. A woman named Paula Jones came forward with a stunning accusation that in 1991, while working as a low-level state employee in Arkansas, Governor Clinton had summoned her to a hotel room and sexually harassed her. She filed a federal lawsuit. She wanted $850,000 in damages. Clinton denied everything, but the case refused to die. So picture this: the most powerful man in the world, already trapped in a real estate fraud investigation and a sexual harassment lawsuit, running the most scrutinized office on earth. And into this pressure cooker, in the autumn of 1995, walked a 22-year-old with bright eyes and a wide smile. Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky had just graduated from Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, with a degree in psychology. She was smart. She was funny. She was full of life and ambition, and the particular kind of fearlessness that belongs only to people who haven't yet learned to be afraid. She applied for an unpaid internship at the White House and got it, assigned to the office of Leon Panetta, the White House Chief of Staff. It was the kind of opportunity that 1,000 ambitious young Americans would have given anything for. Now, let's pause here and think about something almost no one discusses. Monica Lewinsky was not naive. She was not a child. She was a grown woman making her own choices. But she was also 22 years old, working her first major job in the most powerful building in the world, surrounded by people decades older, infinitely more powerful, infinitely more experienced in the way power operates. And the most powerful person in that building had noticed her. Their first significant encounter happened during the government shutdown of November 1995. With most White House staff furloughed, the building was unusually empty, unusually quiet. Lewinsky had been delivering documents to the Oval Office area when Clinton stopped and talked to her. He was attentive, present, intensely focused on her in the way Clinton uniquely was. He made her feel seen. And then he invited her to his private study. What happened next would remain secret for over 2 years. But it did not remain secret forever. Over the following months, Clinton and Lewinsky met privately at least 10 times inside the White House, sometimes while the First Lady was just a floor above them. They exchanged gifts. They spoke on the phone late at night. Lewinsky later described a genuine emotional attachment forming alongside the physical relationship. For Clinton, it may have been an escape. A reckless, catastrophically poor judgment escape from the crushing weight of the presidency. For Lewinsky, it was something more complicated. A relationship with someone she genuinely cared for, hopelessly tangled in power dynamics she was too young to fully see. Neither of them could see what was coming. By early 1996, the relationship had become a quiet but growing open secret among a small circle of White House staff. Secret Service agents had seen enough to raise eyebrows. Senior aides were uncomfortable. The whispers were getting louder. Evelyn Lieberman, the deputy White House chief of staff, made a decision. Monica Lewinsky was transferred out of the White House. Effective April 16, 1996, she was reassigned to the Pentagon as a confidential assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Defense. For Lewinsky, it felt like exile. The White House had been intoxicating, not just because of Clinton, but because of the electricity of being at the center of everything. The Pentagon was quieter, more regimented, more distant. And Clinton was not there. They stayed in contact by phone, but months passed with no physical meetings. The 1996 presidential campaign consumed Clinton completely. Lewinsky waited for the promise he had made that after re-election, he would bring her back. He won. He was re-elected. And the promise faded. Lonely and isolated in her new posting, Lewinsky did what lonely people often do. She made a friend. Her name was Linda Tripp. Tripp was 47 years old, 25 years older than Lewinsky. She worked at the Pentagon as a public affairs specialist. She was warm, maternal, easy to talk to, a good listener. Lewinsky, starved for connection, opened up to her, completely, dangerously. She told Tripp about Clinton, about the phone calls, about the gifts, about the secret meetings in the White House. She had no idea that Linda Tripp was listening to every single word, like a prosecutor building a case. Because Linda Tripp had her own agenda. Tripp was already in contact with Lucianne Goldberg, a literary agent and committed Clinton adversary who had been hunting for something, anything, that could damage him. When Tripp revealed what Lewinsky had confided, Goldberg immediately understood the magnitude. This was not just a story. This was a weapon. In October 1997, at Goldberg's urging, Linda Tripp began secretly recording her phone conversations with Monica Lewinsky. 20 hours of recordings. Monica's voice, her words, her most private secrets. None of it given with consent. And then, in one of those recorded conversations, Lewinsky mentioned something that made Goldberg go very still. She had kept a dress. A blue dress she had worn during one of her encounters with the president. She hadn't washed it. She didn't fully know why. Nostalgia, perhaps. Some emotional connection to a memory she wasn't ready to let go of. But unwashed, that dress contained biological evidence that no lawyer on earth could argue away. Linda Tripp knew immediately exactly what it meant. Monica Lewinsky had just handed her enemies the most devastating piece of evidence in American political history. and she didn't even know it. As 1997 moved into 1998, the Paula Jones case was still alive, and it was about to collide directly with Monica Lewinsky's name. Jones's lawyers, in the discovery process of her lawsuit, were building a pattern. They wanted to show that Clinton had a history of using his position to pursue women. They subpoenaed Monica Lewinsky. Clinton's team went into full damage control. Vernon Jordan, one of Washington's most powerful political fixers and a close Clinton ally, was brought in. Lewinsky was helped to find a job in New York, away from Washington, away from the investigation. And she was encouraged, in ways she later described as pressure, to file an affidavit in the Jones case denying any sexual relationship with Clinton. She filed the affidavit. She denied everything. The machine of denial was fully operational. But here is the thing about lies in Washington. They only hold as long as everyone involved stays silent. And Linda Tripp was not silent. In January 1998, Tripp brought her recordings to Kenneth Starr, the special prosecutor who had been investigating Clinton for years without quite enough to act. The recordings changed everything. Starr petitioned the courts to expand his investigation beyond Whitewater and Paula Jones to include potential perjury and obstruction of justice in the Lewinsky matter. The request was granted. The trap, set months ago by Goldberg and Tripp, had finally sprung. January 17, 1998. Newsweek reporter Michael Isikoff, following a tip from Lucianne Goldberg, broke the story. Within hours, it had jumped from one magazine to every television screen, every radio station, every front page in the world. The President of the United States had allegedly conducted a sexual relationship with a 22-year-old White House intern. The world stopped. Clinton's team scrambled, but there was no crisis protocol for this. This was not a policy failure, not a foreign policy crisis, not a budget dispute. This was intimate, personal, inescapably human. 9 days after the story broke, January 26, 1998, Clinton did something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He stood in front of cameras. His wife Hillary stood beside him. He looked directly into the lens, jaw set, voice firm, and said, "I want to say one thing to the American people. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky." It was a lie. He knew it. His lawyers knew it. And somewhere in Virginia, Linda Tripp was sitting on 20 hours of recordings that proved it. 3 days later, she handed those tapes to Kenneth Starr. Monica Lewinsky was no longer just a young woman caught in a complicated relationship. She was evidence. Her name was being screamed on every cable news channel in America. Late-night comedians mocked her nightly. Strangers recognized her face in the street. Her parents' phone rang constantly with reporters. Her past was being excavated by teams of federal investigators with unlimited resources. She was 24 years old. She had never asked to be at the center of a constitutional crisis. But here she was. Under the crushing pressure of a federal subpoena, on July 28, 1998, Monica Lewinsky surrendered the blue dress. The FBI laboratory analyzed it. DNA testing was conducted against a blood sample taken from Clinton. The results came back a match. Everything Clinton had said in January, every denial, every firm jaw, every pointed finger at the camera, disintegrated in a single laboratory report. He had nowhere left to hide. August 17, 1998. Bill Clinton sat before a grand jury and, for the first time, told the truth. He admitted to an inappropriate physical relationship with Monica Lewinsky. He acknowledged that he had misled the American people with his January denial. He claimed, with lawyer-crafted precision, that what had occurred technically did not meet his personal definition of sexual relations. It satisfied no one. That evening he addressed the nation from the map room of the White House. He was pale. His voice was tight. The ease that had defined him for decades was completely gone. I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong. He asked the American people for their forgiveness. But the machine set in motion could not be stopped by an apology. In September 1998, Kenneth Starr submitted his report to Congress. 445 pages, explicit, comprehensive, merciless. Every detail of the relationship laid bare in clinical language that left nothing to imagination. The report identified 11 possible grounds for impeachment. The two most serious charges, perjury before a grand jury and obstruction of justice. What followed was only the second impeachment trial of a sitting president in American history. Andrew Johnson had been the first in 1868. 130 years later, it was happening again. On December 19, 1998, the House of Representatives voted to impeach Bill Clinton on two articles, perjury to a grand jury and obstruction of justice. The vote was partisan. Republicans pushed it through. Democrats fought it bitterly. The trial then moved to the Senate, where a two-thirds majority, 67 votes, was required to remove Clinton from office. The Senate voted on February 12, 1999. On the perjury charge, 45 senators voted to convict. On obstruction, 50 voted to convict. Both fell far short of 67. Bill Clinton remained president. He finished his term. He oversaw a booming economy. His approval ratings, remarkably, actually rose during the impeachment process. Americans had separated their judgment of Clinton the man from their judgment of Clinton the president. But the legal consequences were not finished. In January 2001, as he prepared to leave office, Clinton accepted a deal with independent counsel Robert Ray. He acknowledged giving false testimony. His Arkansas law license was suspended for 5 years. He paid a $25,000 fine. He narrowly avoided criminal indictment. The Paula Jones case had already been settled out of court for $850,000. Paid not as an admission of guilt, but as the price of making it stop. And then there is the part of this story that is most often told wrong. Because the world talked endlessly about what the scandal did to Bill Clinton's legacy, to Hillary's career, to American politics, almost no one paused to ask what it did to Monica Lewinsky. She was 24 years old when her name became a punchline on every late-night show in America. She was 24 when her face appeared on the cover of every magazine in the world. She was 24 when strangers felt entitled to mock her, humiliate her, reduce her entire existence to a relationship that had lasted barely 2 years. She couldn't get a job. No firm in Washington would hire her. Her name was too radioactive. She left America. She moved to London and earned a master's degree from the London School of Economics. She thought the distance would help. It didn't. She has spoken openly about the years of clinical depression that followed, about anxiety that made simple things, a grocery store, a coffee shop, feel impossible, about the relentless, years-long cycle of trauma that comes from having your most private moments consumed as public entertainment. In a 2015 TED Talk, she stood before the world and said something that stopped people cold. She had considered taking her own life. The woman the world had mocked as a foolish young girl had survived something genuinely devastating. And she had the courage to name it publicly, at a time when the language for what had happened to her didn't yet fully exist. Today, Monica Lewinsky is an anti-bullying activist. She is an executive producer of the acclaimed television series Impeachment: American Crime Story, in which she held creative control over how her own story was told. She gave her own voice back to herself. It took decades, but she did it. 25 years after the scandal, Bill Clinton finally spoke about it with something closer to actual honesty. In the 2020 documentary Hillary, he sat in front of a camera and talked about Lewinsky differently. He said the presidency had put him under enormous stress. He said he had pursued the relationship as a way of managing that stress. He expressed remorse. But here is what the documentary also revealed, and what made many people furious. Even in that admission, Clinton centered himself, his stress, his coping, his feelings. Monica Lewinsky was not consulted about her portrayal. She found out what he had said when the rest of the world did. She responded publicly, measured, tired. "I'm so sick," she wrote, "of the narrative always being about him." And that, perhaps, is the most honest summary of the entire scandal. It happened to both of them, but it has always been told as his story. There is a question that history has never quite resolved. Was Bill Clinton a good president who did a terrible thing? Or was the terrible thing a window into something fundamental about who he was? His defenders point to the economy, to 35 million jobs, to the first balanced federal budget in 30 years, to real foreign policy achievements. His critics point to the same facts and ask a different question. What does it say about a man's judgment that he would risk all of that for what he himself described as stress relief? The truth may be that both things are simultaneously uncomfortably true. That Clinton was capable of extraordinary leadership and extraordinary self-destruction, and that the same qualities that made him exceptional in public made him reckless in private. That is not a satisfying answer, but it is probably the real one. And then there is the question that has become far more urgent in the years since. What does it mean when the most powerful person in any institution has an intimate relationship with the least powerful? Clinton was 49. Lewinsky was 22. He was the President of the United States. She was an unpaid intern. The entire architecture of power between them pointed in one direction. That does not make what happened a crime. The relationship was not illegal. Lewinsky has always maintained it was consensual. But consensual and equal are not the same thing. And that distinction, the gap between those two words, is where the real conversation about the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal still lives today. January 20th, 2001. Bill Clinton walked out of the White House for the last time as president. He was 54 years old. He had survived impeachment, Whitewater, Paula Jones, and his own testimony before a grand jury. He went on to build one of the most active presidential foundations in history. Hillary became Secretary of State, then the Democratic nominee for president. His reputation, dented, complicated, permanently asterisked, endured. Monica Lewinsky was 27 when Clinton left office. She had spent 5 years as the most famous punchline in the world. She spent the next decade and a half rebuilding a life that the scandal had tried to permanently dismantle. She has done it. Imperfectly, painfully, publicly, but she has done it. History is written by those who survive, but also, crucially, by those who hold the pen. For 25 years, this story was written through Clinton's lens. But Monica Lewinsky picked up her own pen. The story she has been writing, about shame, about power, about survival, about refusing to let the worst moment of your life be the only moment anyone remembers, is in many ways more important than anything that happened inside the Oval Office. The most powerful man in the world tried to bury a secret. The secret buried him instead. And the woman everyone assumed was simply the casualty of that story? She's still here, still talking, still writing her own ending.